Let me tell you something. There was once a man standing on the sidelines of the race that was his own life. Not because he didn't have shoes to run, but because he had never tied his laces. He watched others take off, following their success as if it were a movie he had missed the premiere of. He said, "I just need a little more preparation. When the time is right, I'll start." But the right time never came. And while he was still thinking, the race went on, time moved forward, and opportunities were taken by others. I'm not telling you someone else's story. I'm talking about millions of people living like this. It could be you. Because here's a hard truth you may not want to hear but cannot ignore. Life doesn't pause while you get ready. And if you are starting late, then you don't get to run at a normal pace. You don't get to live slowly. You don't get to keep saying, maybe tomorrow. You have to run twice as fast. Not because you are less, but because time has already gone ahead. The question is no longer when will you start, but whether you dare to start now, when you no longer have the luxury of being slow. Because those who start late, if they don't speed up, will always be left behind. And if you feel like you've missed your train, I have something that is both a wake-up call and a promise. The finish line is still there if you decide to run. I've met so many people standing outside of their own lives. They're not untalented. They're not lacking in opportunity. They just haven't tied their shoes. They know what they need to do. They can even speak about it beautifully. But they stay still, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the track, where others are moving forward step by step, rhythm by rhythm, not waiting. They call it preparation. I call it standing still. And then one day, the inevitable happens. The truth hits them in the face. They realize they've been on the sidelines for too long, not just a few steps behind, years. Some lose an entire decade. At that point, the issue isn't starting. It's starting late. And do you know the hardest part of starting late? It's that you no longer have time to take it slow. No more chances to test the waters. You don't get to stroll. You don't get to sip on your delays. You have to act with twice or even 3 times the urgency. Because while you were waiting for the right time, others were already deep into their journey. Those who start early have the luxury to build slowly. They can make mistakes, learn again, adjust. But you no longer have that kind of time. Every mistake now has a cost. Every day you hesitate is one more step you'll have to climb. Every hour you doubt is another door closing. I'm not saying this to panic you. I'm saying it to wake you up. Because nothing is more expensive than delay disguised as harmless waiting. It doesn't just take your time. It drains your position. It erodes your confidence. It makes you doubt yourself. And worst of all, it builds a habit of not starting. A kind of sweet inertia that feels safe but is quietly addictive. Maybe you think you're just resting, but delay never stands still. It pulls you back, inch by inch, gently and silently. It makes you slide out of the game without even realizing it. And by the time you want to come back, you're no longer at the starting line. You're far behind. That's when a decision must be made. Will you keep standing there with your reasonable excuses, clever justifications, and false sense of safety? Or will you admit this? I'm late, but I'm not done. Admitting it isn't about placing blame. It's about reclaiming the power to choose, to stop making excuses, to take action, to begin not vaguely, but with the sharp clarity of a knife cutting through the fog of procrastination. Those who start late don't get to run like everyone else, but they don't have to, because you're not here to prove anything to the world. You just need to prove to yourself that you're back and you're no longer playing by the old rules. You don't need more time. You need more commitment. You need a reason louder than your fear, a goal stronger than your fatigue, a journey that doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to start, right? Now, because if not now, then when? Have you ever felt like you were falling behind, quietly watching others move ahead? The next part will dig deep into that feeling and give you a clear way out. How do you not just start late, but rise strong? What truly separates the one who gets back on track from the one who stays behind? The answer is in the next part. The next part is not theory, it's your action map. If you're truly ready to begin, this is where you learn how to run, not just faster, but in the right direction. I used to think that realizing you started late was the hardest part, but it's not. The hardest part is knowing you're late to your own life and still living like you have time. You see the distance that's already stretched. You know exactly what you've missed. But instead of speeding up, you keep waiting. Waiting for what? A better mood? A more comfortable schedule? Some kind of permission from the world? The truth is, no one is going to knock on your door and say, now is the time. You have to be the one who decides. When you start late, what you need is not more motivation, but clarity. You need to face the consequences of waiting. Because waiting doesn't just cost you time, it costs you position. While you're still redrawing your plan, others have already laid their foundation. While you're still considering, the game has changed its rules. And if you don't shift your mindset, you'll keep chasing what's already passed instead of starting from where you are. Most people don't realize when you procrastinate, you're not just losing time, you're losing yourself. The first time you say, maybe tomorrow, it feels harmless. The second time, it becomes a habit. By the third, you no longer see the problem. That's how delay becomes a lifestyle. And when that happens, you're not just starting late, you're starting from a place of erosion with less confidence, less drive. You're starting in the weakest version of yourself. But let me tell you this, you don't need to be perfect to start. You just need to be honest. Honest that you've missed out, that you've let time slip for too long, that the reason you haven't started isn't because you're unprepared, but because you're afraid of the cost of being late, afraid of chasing others, afraid of exposing your weakness. But if fear is calling the shots, you've already lost before you even leave the line. So you need a new decision, not to wait for the perfect moment, but to act even when you're still afraid. Because you can't wait until you feel ready. That feeling will never show up on its own. It only arrives once you begin. When you take the first steps, even if unsure, even if doubtful, but you move anyway. You need to understand this. There is no perfect script for those who start late. No paved road, no one to point the way. You have to rewrite your strategy, adjust your pace, and most of all, accept that starting late comes with a cost. But that cost doesn't make you lose. It just demands that you show up with more seriousness, more urgency, more commitment, no more ease, no more endless self-forgiveness, only action, clear, consistent every single day. And you know what? Sometimes it's the late starters who become the strongest because they no longer have illusions about time. They know every minute has weight. They don't live with the mindset of, once I have enough, I'll begin. They live with, I must begin to have enough. They don't need pushing because they've seen the abyss and they've decided they're not staying there. Now is the time to look at yourself and ask, how long have I been living in delay, disguised with very convincing reasons? Leave your answer in the comments, and if this part speaks to you, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. You deserve to wake up and be guided toward where you truly belong. Have you ever asked yourself why you know you need to change but still don't act? The next part will take you to the root of procrastination and how to break free. What helps someone who starts late not just catch up, but rise above? The secret isn't in speed, it's in the shift of mindset. Discover what that means in the next part. The next chapter won't just motivate you, it will give you clear tools to take action. If you're ready to stop delaying, step into the strategy waiting for you in part 3. I know that feeling. The feeling of realizing you've let too much slip away, standing in front of the mirror, looking into your own eyes and asking, how did I let it all get this far? But that moment, as painful as it is, becomes one of the most valuable moments in your life because for the first time, you stop making excuses. You no longer blame time, circumstances, age, or anyone else. You look reality in the face and whisper to yourself, it's time. Awakening doesn't come from comforting advice. It comes from hitting rock bottom. It arrives when you can no longer tolerate yourself in a state of delay. When you realize that if you don't act now, you'll keep losing not just time, but the person you were meant to become. From here, everything changes. You step into a phase. Most people never dare to reach the phase where you no longer negotiate with comfort. You stop bargaining with laziness, fleeting emotions, and dreams folded away in drawers, because now you understand every second you hesitate is another step someone else pulls ahead. And this is no longer a race against them, it's a race against the person you used to be. Late starters don't have the luxury of delay. You can't keep living with the mindset of a little bit each day. You no longer have time for halfway efforts. Don't get me wrong, you don't need to run on emotion. You need to run on discipline. Emotions fluctuate. Discipline creates transformation. This is when you stop asking, do I feel like doing it? And start asking, what do I need to do today? And then change is no longer about inspiration, but about behavior, about the small habits repeated consistently, about waking up earlier, saying no more often, acting quicker. You begin to realize that breakthroughs don't come from random bursts of energy, but from keeping a steady pace when others have grown tired. Late starters must run smarter, clearer, and deeper. You're no longer running to catch up to someone. You're running to close the gap between you and the version of you that you've always dreamed of becoming. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying this is true. As true as a door closing every time you choose laziness. As true as an opportunity passing each time you wait for inspiration to return. You've lived long enough in the mindset of just a little more time. Now it's time to live with a mindset of act even when it's not perfect. The truth is, you will never feel completely ready. There will always be bad days, quiet fears beneath the surface. But if you let your feelings dictate your actions, you're handing over your entire future to something you can't control. Only action despite emotion creates results. I've seen people turn their whole lives around with a single decision. No more delay. They didn't begin with massive energy. They began with commitment. That every day counts. That every step, no matter how small, is still a step in the right direction. And they held on to it without noise, without applause. They just did it. They didn't wait for a perfect day. They created one through their habits. The world doesn't hand opportunities to those who merely think. It opens paths for those who dare to move, even when uncertain. And if you've been standing still for too long, maybe what you need now is not a perfect plan, but an imperfect action taken with clarity. Where you are right now doesn't matter. What matters is what you choose from here. To keep watching the clock count down your life, or to start walking not loudly, not with excuses, but with one clear sentence in your mind. I'm starting over. But this time, I won't stop. I used to think that people who start late need more motivation than others. But that's not true. They need a different kind of energy, one that doesn't come from temporary excitement, but from a deep commitment to themselves. When you begin late, you no longer get to live at a normal pace. You no longer enjoy the luxury of growing gradually. Late starters must draw from something else, what I call the energy of awareness. It's not the kind of energy that comes from morning coffee or a hype playlist. It comes from knowing the cost of every day you delay. It comes from the feeling that if I don't do it today, I'll have no excuse left tomorrow. This kind of energy is not loud, not flashy, and doesn't need applause. It's quiet, sharp, and relentless. It makes you ask yourself, every morning, how much lost time can I reclaim today? From the moment you realize you're late, you can no longer operate by your old standards. What's good enough for others won't be enough for you. Not because you're less, but because there's still so much you haven't finished. You can't move at their pace. You have to move at the pace that matches your position. And this is where many people get confused. They think, take it slow, you'll get there eventually. But no, if you're behind, you can't move at the speed of someone ahead. You need a different mindset, a different schedule, a different threshold for discipline. You need to understand that while others might be balancing, you are rebuilding. And rebuilding demands that you cut away what no longer serves you. Relationships that slow you down. Habits that drain your drive. Thoughts that paralyze you. You don't have time to keep doubting yourself. Every minute now must carry meaning. Don't mistake this for extremism. I'm not saying you have to run yourself into exhaustion. I'm saying you have to be awake in every step. Not doing more than others, but doing it clearer, sharper, more precisely. That's how you begin to close the gap. Not with impulsive bursts, but with cold, consistent discipline. Late starters don't have the privilege of stopping every time they don't feel like it. They must understand excitement is a result, not a requirement. Inspiration comes after action. Real energy comes from looking back at your day and saying, I took one more step forward. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to not stop. We cannot fix what's already been lost, but we can stop losing more. And from that point on, every decision must carry weight. You can no longer say yes to everything like before. You have to say no to anything that keeps you standing still, even if it looks tempting, even if it makes you feel safe, because false safety is what makes you quietly lose yourself. When you act with the right energy, you'll see that the world isn't moving as fast as you thought. You don't need to chase everything. You just need to choose the right thing to chase and run with everything you've got. Focus doesn't mean doing everything. It means knowing what's worth dropping everything else for. I'm not here to tell you that life will get easier. I'm here to remind you that you're getting stronger. Every time you hold yourself accountable, you're winning back pieces of lost time. And one day, someone will ask you, how did you catch up so fast? And you'll smile. Not because you're more talented than them, but because you ran with a kind of energy they've never known, the energy of someone who doesn't want to lose even one more day. There's a truth few people want to face, yet everyone can feel it. Every time you procrastinate, you're not just losing time, you're losing ground. It's not an invisible passing. It's a real step backward in a race you're not allowed to stop. Everything around you is moving. Opportunities, trends, technology, people. You're not standing still like you think you're being left behind. While you're still wondering whether or not to start again, others have already finished their first lap. While you're writing down your goals, others are taking action. And you comfort yourself by saying, I just need a little more time. But what you don't see is that every little more time adds up to distance. And that distance isn't just in steps, it's in lost direction, lost habits, lost belief in yourself. That's what few people warn you about. Waiting is not neutral. It's not a pause. It's a silent force pulling you backward, slowly destroying your momentum. First, you lose rhythm. Then you lose motivation. Then, slowly, you lose willpower. And by the time you want to come back, you're not starting from the beginning, you're starting from behind the version of yourself you used to be. Let's take a simple example. Physical fitness. You skip one workout, not a big deal. You skip a week, you start to feel heavier. You skip a month, you have to start over. But the real issue isn't just in your muscles, it's in your mind. When you lose the habit of action, you begin to doubt whether you can still do it. Not because you're weak, but because procrastination makes you forget what progress feels like. The downhill slide doesn't happen all at once. It happens through small decisions. I'll do it later. I'll start next week. Now's not the time. And then one day you wake up in a life you barely recognize, not because you've changed, but because you let delay take over. I've heard people say, everything will come back when I'm ready. But the truth is, life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It keeps moving. It changes direction. It sets new rules. And by the time you return, your old spot isn't there anymore. You have to start from somewhere farther, harder, with higher demands. But don't misunderstand, that's not punishment. That's reality. And reality isn't here to scare you, it's here to wake you up. 1 year without saving, you don't just lose money. You lose growth. You lose leverage. You lose the invisible advantage that others have been compounding. The same applies to health, career, relationships. Everything follows the same rule. Those who wait too long pay a higher price. Not because they're less capable, but because they have to rebuild the foundation while others are already on the 5th floor. And this is the moment you need to decide. Will you keep living in the illusion that you still have time? Or will you admit that every day you wait is a day you'll have to run twice as fast to make up for? Delay is not measured in hours. It's measured in distance, in lost momentum, in chances that don't return. It's a quiet cost, but a very real one. But there's one thing I want you to hold on to. The time you've lost may never come back, but you can. If you're clear-eyed enough to face the truth, if you're strong enough not to blame anyone, if you're committed enough not to live one more day in delay. I'm not asking how much you can do in one day. I'm only asking this: today, are you moving forward or falling further behind? Because sometimes one small step in the right direction is enough to stop you from slipping into a deeper fall. There comes a moment that all of us will eventually face. The moment you look back at the time that has passed and ask yourself, how much have I already lost? But the most painful part isn't the time that's gone. It's how we lived in delay and convinced ourselves it was harmless. We believed that waiting had no consequence, that if we did nothing today, tomorrow would still be fully intact. But in reality, every time we wait, we're not just standing still, we're falling behind without even knowing it. And then one day, you start to feel a certain invisible pressure. It doesn't come from outside, it comes from within you, from the growing distance between who you are today and who you were meant to become. You don't talk about it, but you feel it every morning you wake up, every moment of silence, every time you watch someone else move ahead. It's not envy, it's awareness that you've been living below your own standards for far too long. In that moment, some people choose to keep ignoring it. They bury themselves in busyness, in social media, in distractions that help them forget they've lost their way. But a few, very few, choose differently. They don't run away. They stop, face it, and say one simple yet incredibly powerful sentence: I've fallen back enough. And when you choose to wake up, the first thing that changes is not the world, it's the standard you hold for yourself. Before, you allowed delay, waited for inspiration, made peace with exhaustion, but not anymore. Because now you've seen the cost, you understand that I'll do it later really means I'm allowing myself to slip a little further. And that little bit repeated has created a distance that now feels suffocating. So what you need now is not more inspiration. You need ruthless clarity. Clarity that you no longer have the right to live carelessly. Clarity that you can't afford to keep experimenting with your life. You need a new standard. A level of discipline no one else imposes on you but one you choose for yourself. Because you know you cannot continue the way you've been. Real change begins when you stop asking, do I feel like it? And start asking, am I moving closer to the person I want to become? That's when every decision, every action, every choice in your day revolves around one single axis. Am I closing the gap? Because someone who starts late can't think like someone who started early. They must live with a level of focus, commitment, and intentionality that most of the world will never know. And that's why they stop comparing. They don't look left or right. They don't ask what others are doing. They only ask, how many right actions did I take today? How many real steps? How many meaningful moments? You no longer live to be like someone else. You live to repay the debt you owe to yourself. And the beautiful part is, the more disciplined you become, the lighter you feel. The more aligned you are, the fewer excuses you need. The clearer your mind gets, the more you realize there's still time if you're strong enough to act now. And if someone ever asks, what made you turn your life around so powerfully? You don't need to explain. You just say, I couldn't afford to fall any further. You don't need to do everything. You just need to do the right things. When you start late, the first instinct is to dive into everything. Change your habits, improve your health, revive your career, rebuild relationships. But that's the sweet trap of overload. You don't need chaos, you need focus. And the first thing you must do is identify what truly makes a difference. Not all actions have equal value. There are things you can do all week without moving forward an inch. And there are things, if done consistently, that shift everything else. When you start late, you don't have time for actions that only look busy. You need leverage actions, the kind I call traction actions. That's why you must learn to say no. Not because you're arrogant, but because you know you're in a season where you can't afford to be scattered. A season of recovery, a season of rebuilding. And that season demands you guard your focus, like it's your most valuable asset. Not everything holds equal weight in your schedule anymore. Only the things that drive real results stay. The rest you have to let go. This is one of the most important mindset shifts, from doing everything to doing the right things. Those who start early can afford a few detours. Late starters can't. You can't trade more time for actions that don't move you forward. From now on, every step must have a reason. Every decision must answer one question: does this close the gap? This clarity doesn't make you rigid, it makes you powerful. Because you no longer live in illusion. You're no longer led by emotion. You live by a new standard. High impact, low waste. You know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what it's moving you toward. While others are still thinking it over, you're already taking action. While they're still getting in the mood, you've completed the first task of the day. And that's what builds momentum. Not doing more than others, but doing the right things consistently without interruption. You begin to understand that success doesn't come from rushing. It comes from discipline in the things that matter and indifference to the things that don't. I've seen many smart people get trapped by their own schedules. They do too much, but progress too little, because they confuse motion with progress. But not you. You've experienced what it's like to be left behind. You understand the cost of distraction. You don't need to do 100 things a day. You just need to do 3 right ones and repeat them relentlessly. And that requires you to build a new system of living. Not just goals, but a process. Not just excitement, but structure. You don't wait for motivation to act. You design your day so that action becomes unavoidable. You eliminate randomness. You simplify habits. You make progress the default, not something that depends on how you feel. That's when you enter a different level of performance where you no longer feel overwhelmed because you know exactly what you're cutting out. Every time you say no to distraction, you're saying yes to your own future. Every time you simplify, you accelerate. Every time you choose the right task, you narrow the gap centimeter by centimeter, but steadily, sustainably, without noise or drama. Real power isn't in how much you do. It's in your ability to choose what matters and no longer let yourself drift. You don't need to run in every direction. You need one direction. And the moment you find it, you stop running wild and you start flying. You can't run far if you don't know how to recover. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. And humans, if they don't know how to rest properly, will burn out even on the right path. Especially for those who start late. You don't just need speed, you need energy management strategy. Because you don't have the luxury of long pauses. But you also can't afford to run yourself into the ground. Between those two extremes, you need one thing: purposeful rest. Many people think rest means temporarily giving up, escaping pressure, turning on Netflix, shutting off the brain, pretending reality doesn't exist. But that kind of rest doesn't make you stronger. It just numbs you for a while, then brings you back more drained. True rest is a deliberate act of restoration. It doesn't avoid your goals, it serves them. When you're living in a season that requires acceleration, you can't let your body collapse before you remember to rest. You need to plan your recovery the same way you plan your action. Because without proper recovery, you'll lose your endurance. And without endurance, you can't maintain the high pace necessary to catch up. Late starters often try to make up for everything in a short period. They push themselves to the edge, no sleep, no breaks, thinking that's how to make it count. But the truth is, exhaustion doesn't create progress. Exhaustion creates instability. A sleep-deprived person lacks clarity. An overworked mind loses precision. What you need now isn't blind hustle. It's cold, calculated stability. You must learn to distinguish between 2 kinds of rest. Rest for recovery and rest for avoidance. One is self-mastery. The other is escape. You need the first kind rest as a strategy, as an essential part of your performance system. You schedule rest like you schedule your tasks. You don't wait until you're drained. You stop before you ever get there. And once you learn how to rest properly, you'll notice the difference. Because while others burn bright and burn out, you'll remain steady, consistent, and capable of sustaining peak performance longer. That's what late starters need most. A system that doesn't collapse after a few weeks. A rhythm fast enough to break through, but stable enough not to break down. The secret lies in rhythm, not always running fast, but knowing when to slow down to build momentum, when to take a step back to see further, when to rest for a day to stay productive all week. Strategic people aren't obsessed with doing more. They focus on doing it deep, clear, right, and knowing when to pause before it becomes necessary. That's the difference between someone who performs for a few weeks and someone who sustains it for years. And you need to understand this. If you want to catch up and stay ahead, you can't play the short game. You must invest in sustainability. And that starts with how you recover. Not to be lazy, but to last longer. Not to escape, but to move forward sharper than ever. Because late starters can't run on inspiration. They have to run on systems. And that system only works if you protect your inner energy. That's why you can't allow your energy to be drained by meaningless things. You can't spend hours scrolling aimlessly, chatting without purpose, doing scattered tasks. Every moment you waste is a moment that slows your journey. And when it's time to accelerate, you'll see it clearly. Power doesn't come from how much you do. It comes from how much energy you've saved to do what matters. You can run very fast, but if you're running in the wrong direction, all you're doing is getting closer to a place you were never meant to be. When you've started late, time is not something you have to spare. That's why every step, every action, every decision from this point forward can't rely solely on effort. It must be grounded in the right direction. People often say, just start, and the path will reveal itself. But for someone trying to catch up, you don't have time for blind trial and error. You no longer have the luxury of trying everything and learning from each mistake. You need to move directly, not the fastest, but the most accurately. And that only happens when you consistently and honestly evaluate yourself. You have to ask the hard question, is what I'm doing truly bringing me closer to my goal? That question needs to be repeated weekly, daily, even hourly, because it's easy to get lost in things that look effective. You're busy, you're tired, you're burning energy, but you're not making progress because you're doing things that seem right, but don't produce real results. This is where most people fail, not because they lack willpower, but because they lack the courage to stop and realign. They get stuck in old systems, familiar rhythms, and methods that no longer work. And they hope that by doing more, the outcome will magically shift. But you can't afford to play that game anymore. You cannot waste effort on the wrong track. You must become someone who lives by the reflex of adjustment. The adjustment reflex is the ability to pause, reflect, and correct before the mistake becomes too big. It doesn't require inspiration. It requires honesty. It doesn't need a reminder from others. It needs a living standard, one that refuses to repeat what no longer works. And once you adopt that standard, you begin to see something powerful. Each small adjustment shortens a long journey. You no longer live by, let's see, you live by, let's review. And you do it constantly, not because you're insecure, but because you're aware. Aware that success doesn't come from one massive decision, but from hundreds of small corrections you're willing to make every day. Others ignore that off-course feeling. You notice it and you shift your course slightly, then repeat. That creates positive deviation, not negative drift. And that's when you begin to understand what matters is not just speed, but alignment. You can spend 3 years going a distance others cover in 6 months. If you never stop to check your map, that's not a criticism. It's a warning. And if you live by the rhythm of pause, adjust, move, you'll find you don't need to do more than others, only better and more often. Start with simple questions. What action today lays the foundation for the next 90 days of success? What habit, if repeated, will create momentum across multiple areas of my life? What am I doing just out of habit? Not because it still works. The answers won't just give you clarity, they'll give you back control of your direction. Because you're no longer chasing time, you're rebuilding it. And if you want to do that the right way, you must live by one principle. Nothing is fixed if it no longer moves me forward. Keep the rhythm, keep the pace, but above all, keep the direction. No one escapes the price of action. There are only two ways to pay. Either you pay upfront with discipline, or you pay later with regret. And if you've delayed for too long, you know this truth. Well, the price of later is always far higher than the price of now. But this isn't just a matter of time. It's a matter of commitment and your capacity to face yourself. There comes a point when procrastination is no longer a habit, it becomes a personality trait. When you push everything to tomorrow, slowly, you become someone who no longer believes in their own promises. And when that trust cracks, you don't just lose your goals, you lose part of your identity. You know exactly what you want, but you can't bring yourself to do what it takes to get it. That's no longer a lack of willpower. That's a disconnection between you and yourself. And that kind of disconnection can only be healed by one thing: execution. Execution doesn't require you to be talented. It requires you to show up, to be present, to take action, even when it's not perfect, even when you have doubts, even when fear is still there, because fear is real, but so is progress, and only one of them gets to lead. If you wait until you're no longer afraid, you'll never begin. But if you let discipline speak not loudly, not dramatically, you'll start to change, little by little, not through bursts of emotion, but through non-negotiable repetition. You cannot hold on to a goal without moving toward it. You're either getting closer or slowly drifting away by doing nothing. And what causes most people to fail is not the lack of a goal, but the way they live as if that goal isn't urgent. They write it on the board, talk about it, dream about it, but don't act with the intensity it demands. They don't live like they're making up for lost time. If you've fallen behind others, you don't get to act at the same level. You have to be sharper, more focused, more committed, not just to catch up, but to protect yourself from repeating the cycle. You can't go back to the same place, fall into the same delay, and forgive yourself endlessly. You already know what happens when you don't act. And because you've experienced it, you now have an advantage. The advantage of someone who no longer has illusions about time. From this moment forward, everything you do is no longer just a trial. It's a reclaiming, not in a self-punishing way, but in a restorative way. You're taking back control of your life. You're reclaiming a voice that's been drowned out by the noise of delay for far too long. And to do that, you must choose to live by principle, not by emotion. You must choose action days, not just when you're inspired, but especially when all you feel is exhaustion. It's in the very moment when you don't want to show up but still do that. You begin to rebuild trust with yourself. Trust doesn't come from emotional highs. It comes from repeated action, from being present, from those mornings when you get up, even though yesterday wasn't perfect. And then 1 month, 3 months, 1 year later, you won't just see results. You'll see a different person, not because you were lucky, not because you had some special talent, but because you stopped, faced what you had lost, and said, I will not let myself drift one more day. From that moment, everything changes direction. You may have started late. You may have let time slip by in regret. But the beautiful truth is you still have a choice. And if today you pause to reflect, to listen, to look back and begin again, then you're doing something not everyone has the courage to do. Face the truth and move forward. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be truly serious with yourself. You don't need to know every road ahead. You just need to stop standing still. Because one intentional step is always stronger than 1,000 unacted intentions. And when you begin to live like that with purpose, without delay, each passing day is no longer time lost, but time reclaimed. If there's one thing I hope you carry with you after everything you've just read, it's this. You don't lose because you're slow. You only lose when you stop. And if you've decided you're not going to stop anymore, then I believe you will go farther than you ever thought possible. Thank you for walking with me this far. It hasn't been a short journey, but if this final chapter touches even one corner of your heart and moves you to take action starting today, then every word has been worth it. I wish you strength. I wish you peace strong enough to keep you steady and determination deep enough to keep you moving. The road ahead will not be easy, but I promise you it will be worth it.